In 1961, on the northern tip of Newfoundland, two archaeologists started digging into some strange, grass-covered mounds in the ground. What they pulled out wasn't gold, it wasn't treasure. It was wood, old wood, from a building that shouldn't have been there at all. And buried inside that wood was something that would take scientists another 60 years to fully decode. Proof of the exact year Vikings landed in North America. Not the decade, not the century, the year. And the thing that cracked it wasn't a map or a coin or a grave marker. It was a solar storm, one that hit the entire planet 30 years earlier. Here's how a burst of radiation from space ended up nailing down one of history's oldest mysteries, down to the year. But to understand how we even got here, you have to go back further, because Vikings reaching America wasn't planned. It was an accident, built on top of another accident. Let's start with why Vikings were even out here in the first place. By the late 900s, Iceland is getting crowded. Good farmland is already claimed. If you're a younger son, or you've made enemies back home, there's nowhere left to go. So people keep pushing further west, looking for new land. That's how Greenland gets settled in the first place, and it's how this whole story starts. Now let's talk about who actually gets credit for reaching America. Most people say Leif Erikson, and sure, he's the famous one, but he wasn't even the first to see it. A guy named Bjarni Herjolfsson gets there first, by accident. This is around 985. He's trying to sail to Greenland to catch up with his father who just moved there. A storm blows him way off course. Fog rolls in. He loses track of everything. When it clears, there's land in front of him. Green, forested land. Nothing like Greenland at all. His crew wants to go check it out. Bjarni says no. He's not an explorer. He's a trader. He just wants to get to his dad's new house. So he turns the ship north, finds Greenland eventually, and never goes back to that mystery land again. Leif Erikson hears this story years later, and Leif comes from an interesting family. His father is Eric the Red, a man who got kicked out of 2 different countries for killing people. Eric ends up founding the Greenland colony basically because nobody else would let him live near them anymore. Leif buys Bjarni's ship, buys his route, and decides to actually go look. He lands. He names 3 places along the way: Helluland, flat stone land; Markland, forest land; and the one you've probably heard of, Vinland, wineland, named after wild grapes he finds growing there. For centuries, this was just a story, written down in old Icelandic sagas, a couple hundred years after it supposedly happened. Most historians treated it like a legend, a good story, probably not real. Then, in the 1960s, one man decides to actually go looking, and it wasn't quick or easy. Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad spends years sailing the coastlines of Canada, from Rhode Island all the way up to Labrador, chasing down local legends. He's looking for anything that lines up with the old sagas. Finally, in 1960, he reaches a tiny fishing village on the northern tip of Newfoundland, and a local resident named George Decker tells him about some strange, grass-covered mounds nearby, ridges in the ground that didn't look natural. Ingstad and his archaeologist wife, Anne Stein, start digging the next year, and they find something. Not gold, not treasure, just the outline of old buildings, Norse-style buildings, the exact kind Vikings built back home in Iceland and Greenland. Then more shows up: iron nails, a bronze cloak pin, and this next one matters a lot: a spindle whorl. That's a small tool used for spinning wool into thread. Spinning wool was women's work in Norse society, which means this wasn't just a crew of raiders passing through. Women were living here. Families were living here. They also find evidence of iron being smelted right there on site. That takes real equipment, real time, real intention to stay a while. This is a real settlement, a real Norse village, sitting in North America, exactly where the old sagas said it would be. But here's where it gets really interesting. For decades after that discovery, nobody could say exactly when the Vikings were there. Best guess was sometime around the year 1000. Nothing more precise than that. Then, in 2021, scientists figured out something incredible.
Back in the year 993, the sun let out a massive burst of radiation, a solar storm, way bigger than anything that happens in a normal year. It hit the entire planet at once, and the atmosphere reacted to it. That radiation created a sudden spike in a specific kind of carbon, carbon-14, which plants absorb naturally as they grow. Trees everywhere on Earth, in Germany, in Japan, in Ireland, locked that exact spike into their rings that year, like like a fingerprint stamped into the wood. Scientists call these Miyake events, named after the researcher who first discovered the pattern. They're incredibly rare. Only 2 are known in the last 2,000 years. So a research team took wood samples from the Newfoundland site, and they found that same radiation spike buried inside the wood at the exact same layer. Then they did something simple. They counted the rings. 28 rings from that spike out to the very edge of the wood, the point where the tree was actually cut down. That lands exactly on 1 year, 1021, not around 1000, not sometime in the 11th century, not a guess based on old buildings and pottery style. 1021 is the actual year the Vikings were cutting down trees in North America, confirmed by a solar storm that happened almost 30 years earlier on the other side of the planet. Now here's a part most people never hear about. The settlement didn't just quietly fade away. According to the sagas, it ended in blood. After Leif, more Vikings kept trying to settle Vinland, and one of them was Leif's own sister, Freydis. Freydis leads an expedition of her own, partnered with 2 Icelandic brothers and their crews, and almost immediately, things go bad. Disputes over supplies, over leadership, over who gets what. The saga claims Freydis orchestrated the murder of the 2 brothers and their men, and when none of her own men would touch the women in the group, the story says she picked up an axe and did it herself. Now, sagas love drama, and this part gets debated by historians a lot. It might be exaggerated. It might even be entirely made up by later storytellers. But it's still part of the official record, and it says something. Even in the story Vikings told about themselves, Vinland wasn't peaceful for long. And it wasn't just infighting. There was real conflict with the people already living there too. The sagas call them scrawlings. At first, there's trade, furs for milk and cloth. Then tension builds. Then there's outright violence on both sides. Outnumbered, far from any real backup, the Vikings eventually decide it isn't worth it. They pack up, they leave. The whole settlement lasts only a handful of years. And that's the part that's kind of unbelievable. Columbus gets a national holiday. The people who actually got there first, 500 years earlier, most people have never even heard their names. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, the real history, not the version everyone already knows.